So today we're going to be taking a look at a scenario where the continents of the world go to war. Now this is going to be continents on a team versus other continents on the team. So on one team you might have North America and Europe, and on another team you might have Asia and Africa. Now I've done videos similar to this before where each and every continent was on its own team, but today we're going to be putting them on teams and seeing how they match up against each other. So if you guys do enjoy this video, support is greatly appreciated. You can do so by liking, subscribing, sharing the video, leaving a comment with your input, and there's also other features which you can explore. You can join the channel as a member if you want to, but that's not free, whereas liking, subscribing, that is free. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump straight into the scenario. So, the continents of the world. There are a total of 7 of them, 6 of them with civilization on them, and they are North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, and Oceania. Or I guess if you're American, you would call it Australia. But Australia isn't a continent, it's a country. The actual continent / area is called Oceania, and it consists of all of these guys. So aside from the geography lesson, let's go ahead and take a look at what these sides would look at. Now, how a war like this would start, it wouldn't. This is an impossible scenario. There's no way that every single country in Asia would work together. There's no way that every single country in Europe would work together. It's possible for North America to do such a thing, but I think any other continent is impossible. So let's start with Europe. They're going to be kind of the main drive for a possible scenario because Europe, they're responsible for most of the wars in history. If we're going to go ahead and ignore China and India and what they've done in history, there's been a lot of history with these two countries, a lot of civil wars. But Europe, yeah, the world wars happened here. So here is all of Europe colored in red. Now you might notice that there are a few countries here that are considered Eurasian, which are not in the European faction here, and that's because I just want to talk about that real quick. So first, starting off with Turkey. Turkey is way more of an Asian country than it is a European country. Now history wise, that might be a little bit more linked to Europe due to the Roman Empire, the Byzantine, the Ottomans, but I think if we're looking at this geographically, I think Turkey is more Asian than it is European. And really only European part of Turkey that's in Europe is over here in Thrace. Now for Russia, I would consider them more European than Asian, and that's why I'm going to go ahead and put them on Europe's side, except not fully. You see, theoretically, you really could split Russia in half and have a European country and an Asian country, and they would be just fine on their own. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing today as we split Russia off from its European part and Asian part. This line isn't perfect, but I'm not really worried about it. I might actually clean it up a little bit. But there we go. There is the European part of Russia on Europe's side, and that means we can go ahead and separate this part of Russia and make it its own country. Now this country is not strong. All of your Russia's power is over here in Europe, and aside from a few cities along the southern border here, there's not a whole lot of people here, and there's not a whole lot of economical activities. Now, of course, there's a lot of natural resources like wood and oil, but when you don't have people to, I guess, function a country, then that's useless. On to the next Eurasian countries here, the Caucasus countries of Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. In real life, they're considered Eurasian, but I don't personally consider them European at all because I think it's just like it's too way over here. And if you're going to consider these guys European, then you would also have to consider this part of Turkey European, in my opinion. And you could say that the border of Europe is along the Caucasus Mountains, but in that case, you know, the mountains split all of these countries, so they are the border. But it doesn't matter, we're gonna be putting them on Asia's side, and speaking of Asia, they're gonna be the blue team. There's no way that Europe and Asia work together in this scenario. It's just impossible. I'm actually gonna go ahead and put Thrace on the red team just because it looks better. I guess Thrace is its own country now. It might be the weakest country in the world, but you know, they don't have control of Istanbul, so it's important to keep that in mind. All right, so here we have all of continental Asia colored in here. Now this is another part where I'm going to talk about something, and that's going to be the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Now these guys are considered Asian in real life, and they are part of the Asian continent. I think it's due to tectonic plates, but I'm not 100% sure because I haven't touched on that since like middle school. But I'm going to consider these guys oceanic, and that's because Oceania on its own is extremely weak. Australia, of course, would be the leader for that faction, but this would be Oceania on their own. But if we add Indonesia and the Philippines, that's going to give them a huge boost, and you'll see why that's important later on in the video. But for now, let's also talk about Cyprus. Cyprus is considered European, and I have no idea why. In my book, it's Asian. But once again, if people are going to consider the Caucasus countries European, they also have to consider this European, and if this is European, then I understand that being European, but it's not. So yeah, Cyprus is going to join the Asian squad. All right, for our next continent, we're going to be talking about Africa. Now Africa in real life is extremely divided between pro-USA and pro-China and pro-Russia. There's multiple influential powers taking place here, and I just named them all off. China has a huge influence over all of Eastern Africa. Russia has influence in Northern Africa, and the US has influence in Western Africa and other parts. It's kind of like sprinkled all around. Like Russia is an ally with Mali, who is in West Africa, but the US is an ally with Kenya, who's in East Africa. So the influential spheres are there, but it's also really sprinkled around. But as a whole, I think Africa would be more supportive of the blue team, and well, it's mainly due to basic history. Europe colonized Africa, and that wasn't a particularly good thing. They did horrible things in Africa, so why would Africa back Europe? It makes no sense. And sure, you know, present day relations say otherwise, or maybe they say otherwise, maybe they don't, but like, yeah, it just makes more sense for them to align with Asia. All right, so this is where it gets interesting, because the remaining continents are pretty solid set in my book. Oceania, similar to Africa, was colonized by the Europeans. However, it was a lot less racist over here, specifically in Australia and New Zealand, but it was not good over here. But looking at modern day relations, there's not a whole lot of Chinese and Russian influence in this area, other than like Indonesia. But other than that, these guys are all Western leaning, and they're going to go ahead and they're going to join the red team, teaming up with Europe. Now for North America, this is probably the easiest thing ever. Obviously they're joining Europe. North America and Europe are probably the closest continents in real life in terms of like relations and whose side is they're on. So yeah, they're gonna go ahead and go completely red. And this is how I define North America, from Panama up, and then also including Trinidad and Tobago, and all these guys like Barbados, St. Vincent, and so on and so forth. Now for South America, this is an interesting one, because if they had to choose in real life and to choose a side they would want to be on right now, they would likely choose to be on the side of the red team, and that's because of multiple relations. Colombia, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, they all have good relations with the United States. Venezuela has good relations with Russia and China, and I think Bolivia does as well. I could be wrong there. But what I'm getting out here is that a majority of these countries are Western leaning. They're aligned with the West. Of course, they have cross relations, like Brazil is in BRICS, which is also shared with Russia and China. But that's more of an economical alliance. If we look at military presence and military drills, or not drills, military, what's it called? Cooperations. I think the US has more military cooperations with Brazil than Brazil has with Russia or China. Also, the United States' sphere of influence is over here, and obviously, if these guys were forced to join a side, they would want to join the US side because they don't want to get killed by the US. But what if we made this scenario a little bit more interesting? Obviously, I'm not gonna lie to you, the West wins a lot in my videos. And I try to make it realistic, but unfortunately realism also leads to the West winning a lot of the times, and that's because of the instability of some of the Eastern countries like Russia, and you could say China. Not saying that Western countries also aren't unstable, like France right now is in chaos. But when it comes to unity and working together, I think the West does it better than the East does. And that often leads to the West winning a lot of videos. But South America's joined the blue team here. Maybe they're sick of it. Maybe they don't like the US's influence. I don't know. I'm not from South America. I wouldn't know. But what I do know is that South America just joined the blue team, and this is going to greatly affect how this war is played out. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at this war scenario. So each continent has a matchup. It's a 3v3. It's not looking too good for the red team, not gonna lie. Power rankings, the strongest continent is Europe, followed by, well, maybe not. Strongest continent is actually Asia, followed by Europe, then North America, then Africa, then South America, and then Oceania. You might be able to flip South America and Oceania, maybe. I'd probably give the edge to South America. Anyway, fighting time. We're going to assume that everyone is mobilized and ready. There's no preparations needed. So the North Americans launched an invasion into Venezuela from Trinidad and Tobago and these other islands, as well as the Caribbean, and they have to kind of go around this area because it's impossible to invade, but they eventually gain control of it and move across the northern South American coast. North America has the utter edge here, and that's simply just because of the United States. United States versus the South Americans, I'm not sure how that would go for them. I think they could do it. They would be able to win the war, but they wouldn't be able to like hold on to all this land because it's just too much land. You can't hold on to a whole continent unless it's like Antarctica or Oceania maybe. But there's multiple countries here, so it'll be easier for them to do it if they can. Mexico has a strong army. Canada has a strong army, so they're probably fine here. Now over to Europe. Oh boy, they do have Russia. That's important to note. Russia is very strong, the second strongest country in the world. And even with them losing all of this land, they're probably still a top 10 country in terms of strength because that's all their population and military stuff is mostly over here. I know a lot of their nukes are, if not all of them. Of course, there's gonna be some over here like Sakhalin and stuff, but military assets over here. So Russia starts to invade itself in the most cannibalistic event in history, right behind the I guess the Russian Civil War itself. So I guess Russia is just full of cannibals. Shame. Anyway, Europe. Spain's gonna make an incursion into Morocco from Gibraltar, and this is gonna go extremely well as they take out a majority of the country. Now the problem here is that Africa is full of 1.3 billion-ish people, and well, you can arm those people and they're going to fight back. So a European invasion of Africa is unlikely, and that's simply just because of just how many people there are defending it. Now the population of Europe, I think, is 1 billion. I could be wrong. And Asia, it's like 2, almost 3 billion, I think. The Americas combined is like 2, I think. Maybe I should like start researching some numbers, but you know, I'm not doing that. Research is for people who care. And I don't care what the population of these continents is. I care about what the war is looking like. So Turkey will invade itself into Thrace and start making preparations into Bulgaria and Greece. Now, the issue here is that Greece has a really big army. I didn't know they had such a big army, but they do have a really big army, and they're going to be able to hold off the Turks from invading their mainland area. What they're not going to be able to do is hold off the Turks from taking their islands that they always fight over. So there's that, I guess. Elsewhere, we have complete utter destruction taking place as China and friends start to invade the Philippines. They also start to invade Indonesia, as well as Malaysia, and Brunei is the first country to fall in this war. So it's not looking too good for the red team. It's just too many people in too many different places. Africa and Asia are the 2 largest continents in the world, and then behind that is North America, I think. So already they're at a disadvantage, but when you're taking in population as well, they're at a very big disadvantage. Now, military wise, they might be a little bit more advanced than the blue team, but number-wise, just the numbers are not panning out for them. So let's go ahead and take a look back over at South America here. And the North Americans are continuing to make good progress. They take out all of Ecuador and start to move into the inland of Colombia, eventually making the country surrender. And with that country surrender, we also have the surrender of Venezuela. We see Guyana start to get invaded. But it's at this point that Brazil and Argentina decide that it's time to start pushing back as they put the red team on their heels and push them back to the outskirts of the countries which they have invaded. The North Americans do use the mountains over here to their advantage and are able to hold on to the coastal areas of Ecuador. We also see the US Navy capture the Galapagos. That's really going to be helpful for them. Maybe they'll start like throwing some rare species at them. Bio warfare, maybe, I don't know. Back over in Europe, we have the Europeans pushing the Turks back out of Europe, and the Russians now extend their campaign into Kazakhstan and Central Asia as they have been assigned to invade Asia. Europe itself is going to focus in on Africa and Turkey, I guess also the Middle East, whereas Russia is going to focus in on this. The reason for that is that Russia is familiar with these lands. Russia was once the Soviet Union. As we know, the Soviet Union consisted all of Central Asia, and Central Asia itself isn't even that strong, so it's unlikely that they'll be able to defend themselves as the Russians start to push in. Now, realistically, would the Russians be able to do this? Maybe, but considering that Iran, China, and India are all right here, it's unlikely that they're going to be able to push any further. And that's exactly what happens as they are frontlined and stalemated. Now, they are lucky though, because Iran, India, and China are kind of occupied elsewhere, specifically Oceania. And well, for them, that's going great as they are absolutely dominating the oceanic countries. Indonesia does stand a fair chance, but like the Philippines, they're done. And some naval landings take place on these smaller islands. And overall, this is going to disconnect and discombobulate a lot of the red team's navy. And with that, they start to take bigger and bigger islands. And now we have the island of Brunei, and then Java, and then Sumatra, right? Did I get those island names right? Am I actually a genius? No, of course not. Jakarta is like, I think over here, so they're protecting that with all of their might. They might lose Brunei though. They might. Also, I just realized I called it Brunei. I meant Borneo. This island is named Borneo, Java, and then Sumatra, I think. Okay, anyway, Oceania is falling. Europe's doing really good. North America is doing okay. Back to Europe. Like I said, they're going to be focusing in on the Middle East and Africa. Now, this is going to be their next attempt at invading Northern Africa, and it's going to be involving a lot of naval landings. So we have Spain doing the same thing again. We have Italy and friends doing it over here in Tunisia. And we have some other landings taking place along the northern coast. Now, this is working a lot better than their original plan, which was to pack full troops over here and push through. That didn't work because Africa just sent all their troops upwards and took that back. But now with multiple fronts, and with them also pushing troops into these different fronts, Africa now has to disperse their troops to these different areas, making their defense a lot weaker since there's so many different fronts. And this is where Europe is going to have the advantage, both technology wise and maybe even number wise. In smaller groups, Europe would be victorious, but against like a one-on-one front, Europe would probably not win. So it's better for them to do this small group strategy of invading different areas, and one of their main areas they're focused on is Egypt in the Suez Canal. They do connect up the Tunis and Tripoli front over here in Tunisia and Libya, and that will help them out a little bit, but once again, one-on-one numbers aren't too good for them, and eventually the Africans will start to push them back just a little bit, but eventually this will be stalemated. But back over here in Egypt, they are able to take over Alexandria, and this is a huge win for the red team over the blue team, as Egypt will now start to feel a little bit collapsy. Just made that word up, but they eventually lose Cairo, and with that their government falls apart. They lose the Suez Canal over to the Europeans, and now it's just a whole bunch of desert. They captured all of the Nile River area, so they're good. Israel is going to try to do something. They fail, and eventually we have the Europeans agreeing to link up all of their fronts together so they take over all of the northern coast of Africa, and this is both a good and bad thing. I will say it one more time, one-on-one they're not going to do too hot, so the Africans will push them back here, but they will be unable to get to all of the coast back, as they've merely just pushed them to the coastal front instead of taking all of the land back. Back over here in South America, we have the United States and co now focusing in on the Guyana area. These guys are extremely weak, and Brazil wasn't really reinforcing them, so they fall over with relative ease, and with this gives a whole new front to North America and South America as they start to cut in towards the Amazon area. Now, of course, you're not going to want to invade that because that is pure hell, and there is no getting out of there once you get in there. So they're going to instead focus on the coastal areas. Now, this is still rainforesty, so they're not going to go too far in, but they are making pretty good progress in Brazil. Speaking of good progress, over here on the west coast, we have them snaking down the coast of Peru and using the mountains to their advantage in order to shield them from any inland invaders. So now South America is looking something like this, and once again it's going well for the North Americans. Now remember, the North Americans are only focusing in on their side of the hemisphere right now, so they're not sending any troops over to Europe or Oceania. They're simply just worried about taking out South America and then maybe sending troops over to Africa to help out, but for now they are with South America. All the other continents over here in the Eastern Hemisphere though are sending troops everywhere, and that's because it's a lot more of a unified front. If the Mediterranean Sea wasn't here, then it would be like a giant all-out front war, and that'd be kind of crazy, which actually kind of makes me want to do a video on like, what if the Mediterranean Sea didn't exist? That's a good idea. Good job, me. I'll probably forget though, so remind me in the comments. Anyway, back over in Oceania, we finally have the Indonesians collapsing as the Asians push through, mostly the Indians and the Chinese. But overall, Oceania is completely collapsed, and Australia and New Zealand are the only countries that remain. So China will eventually make a landing in northern Australia and start to push around the continent, avoiding the outback, because who wouldn't? At this point, Australia is sending out distress signals to the US saying, hey, can you send your navy all the way over here to protect us? Or I guess in this case it would be more like that. And the United States is like, no. The US is using a majority of its naval assets in protecting their area, coastal waters, and also invading South America, as well as, you know, maybe doing some naval bombing of Western Africa in order to prepare for something that might be happening later in the video. But yeah, in short, the United States is not helping out Australia here, and this sucks for them because they're getting ready to learn Chinese, buddy. With the fall of their capital of Canberra, or Canberra, yeah, I was right. I was too scared to say it though. I don't know why. It's not Sydney, but Sydney is gone, and that's one of their major cities. They're gonna go ahead and wrap around, take Perth, and that's gonna do it for Australia, as they are forced to the outback in order to fight. But we're not gonna show that. We're just gonna say that they are gone. And New Zealand is basically just sunk into the ocean. And with that, Asia has taken over all of Oceania, and they are now going to go ahead and send reinforcements over here to the front with Russia. Now, Russia knows this, and Russia's going to take advantage of this time, and they're just going to go all out in invading their old selves, and they do extremely well. They even reach Mongolia and wrap around Siberia, where nobody is, but eventually they do meet the Chinese troops as well as the Japanese troops, and that's where they meet trouble. Now, Europe is going to go ahead and have a change of pace and plan here. They do not believe that Africa is capable of invading Europe, and that's probably true. So they withdraw their troops from northern Africa, except for the Suez Canal, as well as some like other major cities in Egypt, so they can hold on to the area. But they are now going to focus all their troops into invading Turkey and the Middle East. Now, this is extremely helpful for Russia, and the reason for that is that obviously the Chinese, the Indians, and the Japanese are now going to start to push back this front right here, and with that, Russia would be in like pretty much a collapse, and Russia doesn't want that. So they called on Europe to help them out, and Europe answered their call, and now Europe is going to go ahead and start to blitz through the Middle East, taking advantage of some of these weaker countries like the Caucasian countries, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Israel, and eventually they meet the border of Saudi Arabia and Iran. Now, these two countries are strong. top 20, both of them, I think. So they will be able to hold off for a little bit. However, it is the entire continent of Europe going after them, so the chances of survival are low, especially considering some of the conditions within these countries. Okay, so Europe is doing a great job at invading Asia, but those troops are here now, and things are going to go horribly now. In fact, they're going to be pushed back pretty much to their borders. They had no real grasp of this region. Finally, there's a stalemate that breaks out, and this is what's left. So Europe has control of a lot of oil right now, which could be beneficial. Then again, Asia has Siberia, so is it really that beneficial? And North America is taking a long time with South America, so reinforcements are not coming. This could be a big issue for Europe here, but all they have to do now is hold on their defense and just hope that North America finishes up quickly. So speaking of North America, they are going to do their best. They're going to go ahead and start to invade areas of Brazil, as this is the more important area to take since they are the strongest country in the continent. Peru will go ahead and collapse, and the North Americans will make their way into Bolivia, a fairly weak country at this point. And with Bolivia's collapse, they're going to go ahead and shoot across towards Brasilia, which I think is like right there. Both sides will come towards the city and eventually take it. And here we have a lot of Brazilian troops fleeing to the Amazon in order to continue in guerrilla warfare. And now the North Americans, though, they're smart enough to not invade this area, just kind of like how the Chinese were smart enough not to invade the Outback. But for simplicity's sake, I'm gonna go ahead and color it in just because. And now they have to make their way down to Southern America, which is going to be a whole nother challenge with Argentina and Chile being here. Back in Europe, their front lines are waning as the Asians are sending more and more reinforcements over. They lose access to the Persian Gulf. We also have the Africans pushing back and taking parts of Egypt. And at this point, the Europeans really need the North Americans to get on over there. We have the Asians pushing up into the European part of Kazakhstan. I don't know why it's considered Eurasian, but it kind of is. And now they are right there on the border, but they will go ahead and wait on the invasion because, well, they're going to wait for them to take the Caucasus first and then rally together to take over this area. But Europe will once again hold out again and just kind of spam North America's DMs like, yo, where are you at? We need to squad up. I think something that I failed to mention, which is also pretty important to note, these countries have to use their reserves and stuff to hold on to Oceania. So while there might be like a lot of troops on the front line, there isn't as much as there could be because they're too busy holding on to this area. And the same thing is going to apply for North America here as they hold on to the northern part of South America. Now let's go ahead and just finish this up here because eventually it would take a while, but just for the sake of Europe and for them holding out a little bit longer, we have the North Americans successfully capturing all of Brazil and starting to push into Chile and Argentina. They take over Santiago, and followed by that, they take over Buenos Aires. And with that, we have the collapse and surrender of both Chile and Argentina, meaning that the war in the Western Hemisphere is over and the red team is victorious. So with that, we have the boats being loaded up, and now here they come. Those pesky Americans, they are on their way. And I don't think it would be too crazy to think that South America would also send troops over. Now, realistically, yes. But in this scenario, no, because they were on the blue team. With Oceania, the same thing could be said. Indonesia would probably help out the blue team because they're more blue team leaning realistically. But since they're under the continent of Oceania, they are forced to be on the red team. Rebellions and stuff would most certainly take place, but I'm not going to account for that here because that would be a little bit too much to follow. But yeah, the North Americans, they are coming, and they're going to send 2 man groups, one to Europe and another one over here towards Morocco, where Spain and them are going to work together to start to invade once again Northern Africa. So looking at that, Spain pushes in, as well as the Americans making a landing in Western Sahara. We also see major islands start to being taken by the US Navy over here in the Atlantic. But back over to Africa, these two sides meet up and they start to do pretty well. It's a much better strategy than what was used before because North Africa is a lot stronger than West Africa. In fact, West Africa is extremely weak, maybe one of the weakest regions in the world. So the Americans, who are kind of already familiar with this, with Liberia, are going to go ahead and have themselves a day as they take over these weaker countries. Now, there is going to be an issue though when they reach over here to Nigeria, who is one of the strongest countries in Africa. I think actually the second strongest. So there they will be held out. But up north, they continue to do extremely well, as with the help of the Europeans, they are able to take over a large portion of Western Africa. And, well, hate to spoil it for you, but this is where the red team is going to be at their climax. From here, it's on downhill. Continent of Asia is going to go ahead and send some reinforcements to the Middle East. And with this, they punch right through their front lines and reach the Mediterranean Sea. With this, we have the isolation of a lot of troops over here as they take naval superiority over this region, and these guys are all killed. Unfortunate, but that's how war goes. Now they invade up into the Caucasus and into Turkey, take over all of Cyprus. And now they can do what they've been wanting to do for a couple of months now, which was invade the southern region of Russia, taking over a lot of oil fields and a lot of oil supply for the red team. Of course, now they're going to be relying on Canada and Alaska. But with that huge loss, it's not going great. Russia will pull its troops out of Asian Russia in order to protect their European part. And this will go well for a little bit until the Asians come up from the south and completely destroy their hopes and dreams. And you know, it's really not fair with China and India being on the same team and also having Japan and South Korea there. These are all top 10 strong countries. Like seriously though, like Pakistan, India, China, South Korea, Japan, those are 5 of the top 10 strongest in the world. And on the red team, you know, you have the United States and Russia, the 2 strongest, but they can only do so much. The US has to worry about holding on to South America. They can't just focus in on Europe, whereas China and India, they probably don't have that problem because there's just so many other countries on the blue team that can use their reserves in order to hold on to Oceania. So likely they're not even worried about it. They're just sending troops over here. Yeah, so like I said, the United States, Russia, 2 of the strongest countries in the world. You also have the UK, France, also top 10 strongest countries, but just the numbers are not working for them. Sure, they're more modernized, they're more technologically advanced, their military is a little bit more built and I guess less made in China, but at the same time, it's just the numbers. China and India combined for a population of almost 3 billion people. That's around almost, well, it used to be, but now it's like what, 3/8 of the world's population? No crap. And then you also have countries who are extremely populated, like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia. The numbers are just not there for the red team, and ultimately, whoever has the most people is most likely to win a war. So Africa, 1.4-ish billion people there, and well, you can arm pretty much anybody and give them a gun and they'll be able to do some damage. That's exactly what happens to the Americans and Europeans as they are kicked out. So now the United States is going to send its troops just to Europe in order to defend the Europeans. However, they might be a little bit too late though, as Russia is going to go ahead and collapse. And with this, the Asians start to flood into Europe. Now, I do believe that eventually they would run out of gas because this is a little bit far from home. And if we're thinking about like who are the main contributors in this war, India, China, Japan, South Korea, Pakistan, and maybe Iran. These guys are the main contributors and their front line is all the way over here. Now, I know it might be a little bit hypocritical of me saying that with the United States being all the way up here and then Argentina being all the way down here. So I guess you could say that's not true, but also considering like the strength of countries between the front line and the main country, like Central Asia is not strong at all. I guess you could say Central America is also not strong, but you also have Mexico there, who's a fairly strong country, and they do help out a little bit. But also, once again, looping back to like military technology and capabilities, the West has the advantage in that case. So finding a longer range war is probably more capable for the United States compared to India and China. But for like the 5th time now, numbers not on the red team side. So after a small incursion into the Balkans and with mainland / Western Europe in threat, the red team will go ahead and agree on terms and conditions of a surrender. Now, what would that look like? Likely whole bunch of nothing. And that's because leverage. The red team has all of South America. The blue team has all of Oceania. Obviously, they would want to swap so they can have their respective teams back. And in that case, it would just come down to what's happening over here in Europe. We can also factor in other things like naval superiority. How like the red team has been constantly bombarding all of Africa due to naval superiority. How other things like air superiority, the red team has had that for pretty much all of Africa and all of Europe. So we can also take that into a factor. But mainly focusing in over here, it's important to look at Russia and what they've been able to take in Europe, because this is what the advantage what am I saying? This is the advantage they have over the red team. They take more land because, yes, this right in front of you. So in a hypothetical peace treaty, we would see nothing happen with South America and Oceania. They would just go back to their original sides. But over here, we would likely see Russia go back to Asian Russia, hence making big Russia. And other than that, I don't think a lot would happen. Maybe we would see Ukraine and Belarus be forced to join that Russia. But other than that, the end of this war and this peace treaty would look like a whole bunch of nothing. Realistically, no side could invade the other side, especially the red team. They would not be able to win against the blue team, and that's just because of numbers. The blue team wouldn't be able to invade all of the red team, and that's also because of numbers. They would eventually run out of numbers. So yeah, that's going to do it for this Continental War video. If you guys did enjoy it, support is greatly appreciated. There's a lot of ways you can show support, but the most appreciated one is subscribing. And then you have liking, and then you have commenting, and then you have sharing. And then if you really want to be cool, you can join the memberships. I've never promoted memberships before because I don't know. Please don't give me your money, but the option is there. I don't know how to it doesn't make me feel right morally. So anyway, once again, thanks for watching. Leave your input in the comments below, and I will see you guys Saturday, hopefully. And of course, thank you to all the super fans. This includes Patrick Clauser, Yo Moma Moma, Texan Cowboy Cheese, Kylie Speaks Plays, Poland Country Ball, Dimitri, DW Cool Dude, Nevada Garbage Trucks, Yakko, Soviet Ball, and Serminator. Once again, thank you guys.